My name is Ron Brownstein. I am editorial director at Atlantic Media, publishers of the Atlantic and National Journal. And we are here to talk about K-12 education reform. Forward or faltering, sufficiently alliterative. And we have a great panel to kind of walk through these issues from who have seen them and are in there with their sleeves rolled up from many different perspectives. On the far right of the table, Kevin Huffman is the commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Education. To his immediate left, Ruslan Ali, who is the chair of the Emerson Education Fund, the former assistant secretary for civil rights at the U.S. Department of Education. To my immediate right, Lowell Milken, the co-founder of the Knowledge Universe Education and the founder of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. To my immediate left, Patricia Levesque, who is the CEO of the Foundation for Excellence in Education and the former Deputy Chief of Staff for Jeb Bush when he was governor of Florida, where she handles issues including education. And to her left, Bruce Reed, the president of the Broad Foundation here in Los Angeles, the former Chief of Staff for Vice President Joe Biden, and long before that, the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor in the White House for Bill Clinton. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you for taking some time to join us here this afternoon. The modern education reform movement arguably began 31 years ago last Saturday, on April 26, 1983, with the publication of A Nation at Risk in the Reagan administration. And since then, we've seen waves of reform rise and fall. We had the governors and the standards movements in the early 1990s. A decade later, we had the big federal initiative around No Child Left Behind. Today, we have a very complex picture, with the Common Core standards advancing in some places and facing a backlash in others. Washington stalemated over renewing the principal federal education law. Charter schools winning praise in some places and facing increased resistance in others. You probably saw the headlines this morning about graduation rates being at an all-time high for U.S. high schools. On the other hand, if you could call up slide 1, please. If you look, we are still facing, I guess we're not going to get slide 1, but if we did get slide, if you, there we go. If we have slide 1, you see that we still have significant educational achievement gaps by income, and maybe slide 2 as well. And by race. So I want to ask all of you, maybe as a way to just start here, you know, after these waves of reform, when you look at where we are now, is the cause of reform in public education gaining ground or losing ground? Kevin, will you start us off?
Sure. Thank you. So I'll start off by saying gaining ground. And here's the good news in American education: we're getting better. Here's the bad news: the rest of the world is getting better faster than us. So we're improving like this, and the rest of the industrialized world is improving like this. And that's a problem for us. I would say gaining ground in the sense that we know things that work, and we have seen success at the school level, at the school district level, and at the state level. And we know what things make a difference in education. We know that high academic standards for kids, accountability for adults who work in the system, and choice for parents. When we have a combination of those things, we know that we can get results. So I would say we're in a good place in terms of trajectory. We're not necessarily in a good place in terms of the political conversation, though. And I think there remains a real question. We know what works. We know that the rest of the world is growing faster than we are. We don't necessarily have the political will or the stomach to do the things that actually will make American education competitive with the rest of the world in the coming century.
Ruslan?
I'll agree with everything that Kevin said. And as you mentioned, it was 1983 that the nation at risk warned of the rising tide of mediocrity. Mm-hmm. The truth is, despite all of the progress that Kevin has referred to, that tide of mediocrity is rising still. And at the same time, we have lost that national imperative, that Sputnik moment, that galvanizing force to improve our schools that would give us the stomach, as you mentioned, Kevin, to build on the research, the progress, the success to date, and take it to scale.
Moving forward, but not fast enough. And I'm not sure that we have the will and the focus to do what's necessary in order to really improve K-12 education. I happen to be a believer that if you have 51% of all African American children in fourth grade that cannot read and 50% of all Hispanic children in fourth grade that cannot read in the United States in the year 2013, there's something fundamentally wrong with the game plan that we have. And as you indicated, we've been focused on reforms, hundreds of reforms, and we have not been successful. And I would argue we've not been successful because we've never focused on the most important element, and that is to try to figure out how to attract talented people into the profession and then create an environment in which that talent can be challenged, developed, retained, and motivated. There's some states and there's some districts today that are doing innovative things in that area, but until we come as a nation recognizing that the reality is we need to focus on our teaching profession, I don't think we're going to achieve sustained and meaningful results in student achievement.
Trish?
I agree. I think we're moving forward and not quickly enough. But I would add that we're getting ready to enter kind of a perfect storm, is what I call it in education, where the left and the right are in agreement, the far left and the far right, against things like standards and measurement and the new description of charter schools, which is this, privatization of our schools. And so you have states like Tennessee that made the largest gains on the history of the NAEP in 4th and 8th grade reading and math, very much due to the hard work of Kevin Huffman and the governor and their emphasis on having quality teachers. And then this legislative session, there is a complete reversal on the policies that were just put in place that led to some of these gains. And so there is a political reality of the reforms that have been working really well, that we know work. Now all of the opposition to those reforms is really strong, is really banded together, and we are going to have to face this issue. And I'm not sure that we have the political will among even constituents, parents who think it's, we're all living in Lake Wobegon where every child is above average, and they don't realize how far behind some of our kids really are.
Bruce?
I'd say there's no question that we're better off than we were 31 years ago. The reform has come in waves. Each wave has gone farther than the last. The tide's still coming in. 3 reasons for hope. First, I'm old enough to remember when there weren't any charter schools. Now there are 6,500. And that's important for a couple of reasons. In the places where they've reached critical mass, like New Orleans and in parts of New York and here in LA, where there's a massive quality and scale, they're making a huge difference in the classroom, and that means that there's a political toehold as well. We saw in New York that when some tried to roll back the growth of charter schools, their parents rose up, and 10,000 parents in Albany outshouted everyone else in the state. So I think that's a reason for hope. I think the talent pipeline, the number of people on this panel who've come into education reform over the last 20 years, they're not going away. And the third thing is the accountability genie is out of the bottle. It's going to be messy. It's going to take a long time to sort out all the kinks. But once results are out there, it's hard to deny them. But I would say that until we fix our political system, we're always a nation at risk.
Good point. Let's dive a little deeper into some of the specifics that we kind of touched upon in that. I mean, Kevin, let me start with you again. The Common Core, an idea that once wasn't very controversial, was kind of moving forward very quickly. Now it's facing a lot of resistance, some on the left from unions and Democratic states, a lot in conservative states. Indiana today kind of finalizing, moving away from it. Tennessee, a state where, much to your frustration, the state legislature has voted to delay one aspect of it, the testing tied to it. What's happening? What's happening specifically in your state, and what do you think is happening more broadly around the Common Core?
So I think the coalition of the left and the far left and the far right has had an impact even in a place like Tennessee. So the good news is we're moving forward with the standards. So we're moving forward with Common Core, and that's critically important because there's no reason to think that Tennessee kids should be doing math that's easier than kids in Virginia or kids in Massachusetts or kids in Florida. But the pushback on the assessment is this sort of mix where you have some folks who are opposed to Common Core and who don't like the idea of our assessing the Common Core standards. And then on the left, you have the unions who ostensibly they continue in DC, the national unions, to pretend that they support the Common Core, which theoretically in the form of sort of words on a piece of paper, maybe they do. But when push comes to shove and you start saying, actually, we're going to hold adults accountable for making sure that kids have actually learned those standards, that's when the rubber hits the road. And so I think part of what's happened in Tennessee and elsewhere is you've had the union and some of the folks on the far right coming together. And even though I think we've got a broad group of people in the middle, a majority of people in the middle who really want high standards for kids, and this is true in Tennessee and across the country, they're not organized special interests. And so that leads to a political conversation where people are far more likely to hear from the noisiest elements out on the fringes.
So what are the, Russell, what are the implications of this? Do you think Common Core, kind of takes this headwind, pushes through it, and goes on to become a major factor in reshaping the way education is delivered? Or is there now a question about how big a deal it's going to be?
I think we're stuck. And over the next several months, we'll know the course that we're headed in. It's not about what students should know and be able to do at every grade level anymore. As Bruce mentioned, we have been doing this in this country for over 31 years, starting with the President Bush and convening those great governors, one of which was a governor from Arkansas that came up with Goals 2000. So this idea that we ought to have standards and benchmarks for learning is one that we've accepted for a long time in this country. Every time, though, as we look at these cycles, we hold adults accountable when we have consequences for teaching and learning is when we begin to roll back those standards. We did it with No Child Left Behind when we had every state developing their own, and we saw a real backpedaling on rigor, and we're seeing it now. In California, for example, we love the Common Core, whether that is left or right, but we've eliminated testing and accountability to measure. New York, when you have those consequences associated with Common Core, you see a kind of vitriolic pushback by the same parties that support it without those consequences.
Yeah. So just across the panel, do you see Common Core entrenching itself, becoming institutionalized, becoming a major factor across the country, or are we stuck? What's your sense? Which way is the needle pointing now?
I think the standards themselves are going to survive. The standards are, the College Board is going to be aligning the SAT to the Common Core standards. So I think the standards themselves survive. Where I think we're heading into this, this difficulty is on measurement.
That's right.
It's do you measure the standards faithfully? Standards themselves don't solve anything. You have to measure those standards because that measurement drives how deeply the teachers instruct in the classroom. You have to get curriculum right. You have to get all of those types of things right. But it's this anti-testing, anti-accountability fatigue that I think is setting in. And if we don't overcome that, I talked about this with my board yesterday. The reforms that we know work are kind of like they're eat your broccoli. Testing is not this warm and fuzzy thing. And what opponents of testing promote is warm and fuzzy. Let's put more money into the system. Let's have lower class sizes for all. Those things feel good. Testing isn't one of those feel good things, but it's so critical because if we don't hold schools accountable or teachers accountable, if we can't measure if our policies are working, we can't build on them. And so that to me is the critical issue is how do we get through the next year or two with stronger tests, with higher cut scores? Are we going to actually, when these consortia get together and set cut scores, are they going to set cut scores that are meaningful?
Define cut scores.
Cut scores would be the level at which we believe is grade level performance. On the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, proficiency is set at this level, and most states their grade level performance scores are set much lower. So there are lots of challenges that are going to continue to come up, and to me this testing and measurement, and if we can survive that and get that right, I think we do have long-term success.
I think, Ron, that we've had a problem, I think, in portraying the whole concept of testing. It's always viewed to be, I think, a sort of a punitive type of thing, that there's bad results that are going to come out of it. And I think that the problem we have is that testing really should be viewed as an opportunity for one to improve, right. And it should be viewed as professional growth. This is the same issue we have in evaluation of teachers. With our National Institute for Excellence in Teaching, we've had the great fortune to actually have done 750,000 evaluations in the public schools in the United States. The National Institute has the longest standing, largest teacher evaluation initiative in the country. It's been in existence for 15 years. And the teachers who are involved in our initiative view the evaluation process as something that's going to help their teacher practices. It's viewed as an extension of professional development. So we definitely have a serious communication problem here. And I would also say to you that for years in this country, the states have been telling the constituents that their students, that the young people in that state are 70% proficient, 80% proficient. Yeah. And as Patricia just said, nationally, for the most part, only about a third of American students, give or take, depending on what grade, are actually proficient in either reading or math. So we have been communicating for so long that our students are doing well. The harsh reality of Common Core and these new assessments is going to be that is not the case. And in the initial results that are coming out and some of the trial bases, that's telling.
Well, you know, Bruce, Patricia made the point before that it's not only the left and right that resists. At times, it's the parents who resist. And Arnie Duncan had that, recent comments about, quote, white suburban moms who don't like the testing because, quote, their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were. So let me ask you, I mean, is this only just, kind of everybody fleeing accountability in the system, or have the forces of reform mishandled the way testing has been introduced in some ways that has brought us to this circumstance where the entire edifice looks a little shaky?
I don't think everyone's fleeing. Look, this whole thing is a challenge to mediocrity. It's a challenge to the country to up our game, which we have to do, and everyone knows we have to do it. But that's not easy. It's not easy to turn around a low-performing school. It's no easier to improve a mediocre school. And what we're seeing now is, the whole reform effort has been to smoke out the excuses, to take the excuses out of the system, and everybody wants to point fingers. The feds want to point to the states want to point to the feds. Everybody involved in the system eventually has to see it in their interest to do better. And I think parents deep down know that. They need leaders who tell them that. I think that it's impressive that so many states signed on to Common Core in the first place. I think that was a sign that many of them understood that their states had to get better. I think this is going to be a long, hard game. As Kevin pointed out, we have to close an achievement gap and a gap with the rest of the world, and neither one of those hills is easy to climb.
Yeah. So, Kevin, and then Patricia, because the point that Patricia raised, kind of raising the question about whether there really is a sufficient correlation of forces politically that supports reform at this point. When you are pushing your efforts in a state like Tennessee, who's at your back?
Well, so, the business community is at the back, and many of the parents are, but what I would say is they're not organized, and in the context of the business community, too often they sort of gather in rooms with each other and they talk, and then you go over to Legislative Plaza and it's other people who are out there handing out pamphlets, not the business community. And the same thing with parents. Parents are busy. So, I think that there is an organization challenge and a sort of political muscle challenge, and I think there's also a challenge in defining what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what does victory look like. I think if we can get everybody to agree that victory looks like stronger academic achievement, then you start having a conversation about, well, did we do that or didn't we do that, and how do we do more of the things that lead to strong academic achievement? But I'm not sure there's agreement right now that that is what we are attempting to accomplish. And so if you don't actually establish the right goal line and get people bought into the notion of what is the right goal line, then when you actually achieve the goal, it's hard to claim victory.
So when you go into a district, you're working with a district, you're talking about improving teacher quality, but also, improving assessment. What is the constituency that is there to say, yeah, we do have to be tougher?
Well, I think it starts with a dynamic superintendent. You have to have a district superintendent who is really interested in reform, interested in providing an elevation for the students. I think you have to have principals who are willing to change a school culture. And what's been fascinating with our initiative, which involves a number of different elements, career paths, performance pay, and things that have historically been rather controversial. I think when teachers see that the evaluation system is fair and transparent, and there are opportunities for them to elevate themselves within the teaching profession, and they don't have to go into administration in order to do that, I think they're embracing it today too. I also will say, I think we have a slide, let me just say, it might be 358, let me see if we have 358. They could punch that out. But the point I want to make about that is, we're also seeing a difference among younger teachers than older teachers. So I think this is an interesting slide that shows you that if a teacher's been in the profession for 1 to 10 years, they're much more receptive to ideas of evaluation, to having part of their compensation based on evaluation, student achievement gains. So we are seeing changes taking place in the profession, no different than we see with younger teachers and their facility and ability to use technology in effective ways. We're also seeing different attitudes. Because young people have so many opportunities in America, why are they going to select teaching if they don't feel that they can have truly a career and earn competitive compensation?
Russ, I want to bring you in on the teaching in a moment. But let's just finish up this point about the political coalition, since you raised this question. Talk in a little bit more depth about, a little more detail about your view about what are the forces that are aligned behind reform in your typical community, and what are the forces resisting, and how do they typically stack up?
Well, clearly the folks who are against reform, I call it the alphabet soup. It'll be the NEA or the FADSS. It's the Superintendents Association or the School Administrators Association, or in many states it's the PTA or the teachers union that is opposed to a lot of the accountability and the reforms that are being put in place. It is the business community that is one of the biggest champions for reform, but of all the issues of the business community, even though we hear all the time, the #1 challenge is having a quality, talented workforce. When you stack up all of the policy issues that are in front of the business community in front of a legislative session, working on a school accountability bill versus a workers' comp tax, unemployment comp, property tax issue doesn't seem to rise to the level of getting their political muscle or their engagement behind it. I do think there are two things that we need to do. We need to have better communications to parents. We need to talk about these issues in a different way. We need to make sure parents understand what assessment means and use it in different terms. Anything that your child wants to be in the future, you want your child to go to college, you want a lawyer, doctor, accountant, nurse, pilot, engineer, teacher, they're going to have to take tests. And so we need to do a better job of making sure parents understand how assessment and measurement is built into their entire educational career, and how it's good and how it's something that they need. And the other thing that we need to do is work on more of the political coalitions that are debating on this issue, and flip some of the dialogue and make sure that the individuals and the associations that are part of this are held accountable for some of the advocacy that they do.
Ruslan, we were talking about teacher quality, and there is a fascinating lawsuit here in California that goes to one really critical element of this, and it has to deal with the way teachers are assigned to schools, who is dismissed at times of cutbacks, and the argument is that the practices that are in place systematically harm low-income and minority students. Can you talk about this case and the implications of it nationwide, perhaps?
Sure. It's the case Vergara. There are 9 plaintiffs in California, mostly from Los Angeles, Oakland, and Alum Rock school districts. These 9 young people have challenged the tenure provisions of the education code, not just the tenure provisions, but dismissal, reduction of force, that is last in, first fire. They contend that these provisions taken together allow ineffective teachers in the classroom, and that is a violation of California's quality right to an education in its constitution. When you look at who suffers more from these harms, as you mentioned, Ron, across the board, low-income students and students of color have more than their fair shares of our lowest performing teachers. This lawsuit is stunning, though, not just because of its novel constitutional questions, but it is, for the first time, declaring, we believe, the judge will decide hopefully any day now, that teachers are a constitutional right? In this state, we've looked at time. Time matters when it comes to equality right to an education, courts have said. Money matters. We've never declared that teachers matter, despite all of the research that shows that teachers matter more than any other in-school factor. So the litigation is groundbreaking. It has received a lot of pushback from those same forces and others that Patricia mentioned. Many have contended that you can't be pro-civil rights, pro-equity, and pro-Vergara, as if there is a litmus test and that you cannot somehow challenge or question status quo and long-standing union policies and be pro-kids at the same time.
If plaintiffs win, what would be the practical implications? What would it mean at a high school in Los Angeles?
The real practical implications are a stay and an appeal, and we're going to go over
Right.
a
If
right?
you get someday.
That said, the provisions would be declared unconstitutional, and we need to come up with new ones. That is not to say that we ought not have tenure or bargaining or protections for teachers, no doubt. You cannot look at that same single salary schedule that we can see causing inequities today, know its history. This country at one point decided we were going to pay black teachers and white teachers differently solely because of their race, and so the single salary schedule was an equity tool 50 years ago. That said, we've seen it today cause great harm for the students that are most dependent on their teachers for their learning.
If this principle is established, how much would it change teaching?
Well, first of all, I want to say we've had a policy in this country for years that the least experienced, least effective teachers, teach the most highly challenged students. I mean, that's the system that we have. And the only way to reverse that system, in my opinion, is, the lawsuit can certainly make the statement that you need to find a new solution, but the only way we're going to change that dynamic is by providing teachers with the opportunity to receive substantially more compensation and to play more of a leadership role in these high challenging schools to drive the instructional program of that school. That's the only way you're going to attract them. And until we figure out that mechanism to bring our most highly talented, highly effective teachers to teach our most challenging students, we're not going to have sustained and meaningful improvement in student achievement in these areas.
Look, I wish it hadn't come to this, but we have yet to see historical progress when it comes to equity and civil rights that has not come from a mandate from the courts or the federal government. It has come to that in this instance. We have tried for decades to incent teachers to go, the best teachers to go to schools that need them the most. We have tried evaluations. We have tried promoting the teaching profession. We have tried diversifying it. We can't get unstuck. And unless we ensure that the entire profession gets better and those that are most equipped to teach students that need them the most actually teach them, we're not going to see the kind of gains.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this, on the litigation?
I want to weigh in on one thing.
Yeah.
I want to disagree with Russell.
Yeah.
Because our initiative, the TAP initiative, we have brought the most effective teachers to teach in the most highly challenged schools. 97% of all TAP schools are high-need schools. And how have we done it? By paying them significant increases in salary and let them participate as part of a school leadership team to drive the instructional program.
We're not disagreeing. Here's,
But I'm saying you're going to get a mandate, but then when you get the mandate, we have to have a solution. So what is the solution then?
It is what you're talking about, right? But we have these pockets of excellence that we need to get to scale.
You're right.
And with a judicial decree that says we are not allowed to harm these children anymore based on putting teachers and adult interest first at the expense of children's needs, we're not going to be able to bring in this great program.
No other state, this would be groundbreaking. Is any other state, has there been any other declaration like this by a court?
No, not yet.
Speaking of things that aren't controversial, let's talk about charter schools for a minute. Try to hopscotch through a few others. Now, I do remember, I mean, when you were just kind of settling in the White House, the very first charter school laws were Minnesota and California, and they were each passed by a Democratic legislature and signed by a Republican governor. That's how it started. Now here we are, as you said, 20 some years later, and we have a lot of them. On the other hand, we are seeing more pushback in places like New York City with the mayor. What do you think the trajectory is of charter schools? Again, kind of similar question to Common Core. Are they growing as a part of the solution, or are they now in danger of being pushed back as a kind of an overall contributor to the way kids are educated?
Well, they are growing as part of the solution, which is why there's a pushback. But
by the way, real quick, if you could call up slide 3, go ahead, Bruce. That'll have the numbers.
Yeah, the population. The
3 and
school
4.
population is about doubled in the last decade, and I think a couple things are going on. One is that in some places we are seeing phenomenally good charter schools. There are many here in LA. New Orleans is doing a spectacular job. The schools that Mayor de Blasio tried to shut down in New York were the best middle schools in the state.
The best
4 through 6 schools in the state, highest math scores in 5th grade. Now, that's not true across the board, and I think one of the real priorities of the reform movement has to be to work with charter authorizers around the country to shut down bad charter schools. There are a lot of low-performing charter schools that have been left on the books just because of inertia or political opposition to shutting them down. And I think we need to aggressively open new high-quality charter schools and close down the bad ones.
Yeah. Kevin, and charter schools, how big a part of the solution do you see them being?
I think a very big part. I think they're going to continue to grow, and I think in particular cities and communities, they're going to be a major part. Are they ever going to be as big a part in rural communities, which are a big part of Tennessee's education system? No. But I think they will continue to grow, and the political forces will align around having more growth because parents want choice, and they're going to demand that level of choice. And still, I would say, you still see a little bit of the weird political alliances in the charter school world right now, too. You know, on the left, you see far too many people who view them as taking money away from traditional schools. And to get to that mindset, you have to actually view each kid who walks through a door as a cost center. And then when the kid walks out the door, you think that you've lost money. That's not the way we need to view education. And that's not the way we need to think about the funding of our schools. And I think, you know, on the far right, broadly speaking, I think conservatives have really embraced charter schools, but on the far right, you see more folks who seem to be confused about the notion of what local control means. And there are some folks who have defined local control as meaning that the local school district should be able to make all the decisions, rather than viewing local control as putting more control in the hands of parents, which I would think would be a more natural argument to make, but some people have not really embraced that.
Patricia, we talked a little before, there's certainly a conservative backlash against Common Core with charter schools. Is that coming mostly from the left at this point?
It is coming more mostly from the left, but I think Kevin's right. We're starting to hear that from the far right, this local control, all being this at a school district level versus a parent.
Let me turn to another. We're going to try to cover a couple different things in the last few minutes before we bring in the audience for question. Next month, 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, but also another milestone. If you could bring up slide 8, please. If you look at the data from the National Center for Educational Statistics, this class of K-12 public school students finishing school in June will be probably the last class ever in which a majority of the public school students in the US are white. Starting in September, they project that the next class will be majority kids of color. And that will only continue going forward. When you look at those two things coming together, and here we are 60 years after Brown, how are we doing at narrowing attainment gaps? Where can we be proud of the story, and where do we still have the biggest hills to climb?
Well, we certainly can be proud of the exponential gains that so many students of color and poor students are making in lots of places. Some of them are in fantastic charter schools, some of them are in whole districts, and some in traditional schools. So it's not to say that progress is stagnated writ large. That said, the achievement gap is not closing at the pace that we need it to for our country, especially given the demographic shift and change. We are more segregated today than we were as communities and as a society at the time of Martin Luther King's passing in 1968. That's whether what compels you to want to transform schools is your moral imperative. The truth is the achievement gap exists because the kids that are often most dependent on their schools for learning, we give them less of everything that we know makes a difference, whether that is great teaching, the rigorous curricula, hence the spirit of Common Core, so we don't get to choose who learns what, which really has played out in a caste system. The attainment gaps, graduation gaps, we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Because of the demographic shift, though, it's not just a moral imperative anymore. Equity is strategy. We cannot transform our institutions and our society without doing what it takes to close the achievement gap. And we've got to get out of the notion that it's a zero-sum game, that somehow to take care of other people's children means hurting my own.
Well, the best estimates, the best estimates are all of the net growth in the workforce between now and 2030 will be among minorities, and that there will be literally fewer white people working in 2030 than today. And that this is not only an equity issue, but this is the clay that we have to work with as a country.
Well, we had a panel yesterday, and I just happen to remember these statistics, that we did see improvement on NAEP in the last 2 years in our large urban districts. We used to have 56% of all students in these large districts in 4th grade that could not read. Now it's been reduced to only 46% in 4th grade. We used to have 55% of all 8th grade students who could not do math. Now it's been reduced to 40%. So that is progress. It sounds like we're making progress, but how about those students who are passing through the system once again, who cannot read and cannot do math? And we calculated it's going to take till 2030, based on the rate of growth that have occurred, before we're ever going to be able to close that achievement gap, and we'll have 75 million additional children will pass through a system that is still at risk.
So Bruce, let me ask you to follow up on something that Ruslan said, which was there's actually a pretty furious debate among the academics and experts in this area about whether segregation is getting worse or is just stagnating. But either way, we know that today about 3/4 of African American K-12 students attend schools in which a majority of the student body lives in poverty, and about 2/3 of Hispanics, or at least qualified for reduced price lunch. So they're in that broader definition of poverty. So I think the question, I mean, you know, and we all know the examples of individual great schools and principals and leaders who have surmounted this. But as long as there is that level of concentrated poverty, when you look at the overall results, do you think we can produce educational outcomes sufficient to what we want, or is it always going to be kind of difficult to get where you want when you're dealing with that level of concentrated poverty?
Of course we can. This is America. This is ultimately a political problem. It's a question of whether we have the will to fix our politics so that, you know, Bill Clinton once told me that the education system was the last unreinvented part of American government, and in a sense that's still true. That most people don't know who their school board member is. They don't show up to vote for them. They don't hold them accountable. We have a system where nobody's on the hook for what happens, and that's how this kind of inequity can go on. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, we can fix any problem if we fix that one.
Do you think you obviously you have urban centers where you have schools where the vast majority of kids are living kind of below that income level. Can you make those schools work systematically, or ultimately do you need to kind of deconcentrate the poverty?
Well, both. I mean, I think you can make it work, but it sure makes it a bigger uphill battle. In Tennessee, about a quarter of the kids across the state are African American. In the bottom 5% of schools in the state, 92% of the kids are African American. That's just an injustice, and can we take that on in terms of improving the academic outcomes of those schools? Yes. Are we going to? Yes. Would it be a lot easier if we weren't battling against concentrated poverty? Yes.
Patricia, your thought?
I think it absolutely can be done, and it actually is being done. So if you look at the state of Florida, 2.7 million students, nearly 60% of the population is low income or minority. The low income population in the state of Florida is typically larger than most other states' total population of students. But yet student performance in the state of Florida has been increasing consistently every year since major foundational reforms were put in place. The achievement gap, I think Florida was the only state to narrow the achievement gap with African American students in 4th and 8th grade reading and math on this last NAEP exam. Low-income Hispanic students in the state of Florida outperform the average student in the state of California. Let me say that again. Low-income Hispanic students whose native language is not English do better on an English test than the average student in the state of California. So how did these things occur? How did the gains occur? We know. We measured. Yeah. We held schools accountable. We made sure that students didn't go to 4th grade without having basic literacy skills. We made sure that we're putting more effective teachers in the classroom and rewarding them. And we did massive amounts of school choice. Charter, virtual school, home ed, private school choice, blended learning. All of those things work, and it gets us back to why aren't more states doing it? It's the political issue. Mm-hmm. So we've got to deal with this political issue and get individuals engaged in adopting policies that we know work, because we know they do.
Do you want to weigh in on this question of whether you can whether we will get the results we want as long as you're dealing with those levels of concentrated poverty? Can you work around that, or do you ultimately have to break that up?
Look, we have to work around it because the laws that created the segregated schools have been dismantled, right? In 60 years, we've made great progress. The water hoses have been put away. Laws that force a segregated community and society are gone. That said, the segregation we see is about housing patterns. It's about how we built highways in this country, right? There are vestiges that cause segregated communities, the vestiges of our segregated society that still exist today. And no doubt, as Kevin said, communities that are more diverse are better. Not just for the educational opportunity and learning that happens, but in creating a more tolerant society and people. So, but because we don't have the tools of dismantling laws or a court that says with all deliberate speed, we're going to ensure that integration is possible, and 60 years later we're still waiting for that speed, we have to find ways to make the schools where children live today work better. And there is no way you can look at monolithic schools, some of which are charter. Mm-hmm. We talked about a couple in Florida, or we can look at, say, yes, college prep in Texas, for example, and say that because they are monolithic, they are bad, when all of those Latino and African American kids are going on to college, and they are succeeding and closing the achievement gap in ways that their parents couldn't conceive of as possible. So segregated schools alone can't be deemed bad schools, just like integrated schools alone can't be deemed successful schools. It's whether we meet those kids where they are, catch them before they slip, and get them to where they need to go.
You want to
I think my comment is that it's a combination of a lot of factors. One of them is leadership. I mean, leadership at the national level, leadership at the state level, leadership at the district level. It's all about leadership. It's about creating a coalition where you can change different kinds of political points of view. Florida obviously has done a very good job. One of the big problems with K-12 education is that it's generally a one-off story. Everybody's got a story. Well, I've got this school over here, this school is really doing great, I've got this over here, and so on. And what we found is that really it's all about scalability. I actually believe in our country today that we know what works for our K-12 system. So the big question is, why can't we do it? And we can't do it because of a lot of reasons, the leadership reason. There's another reason. We generally have a changing cast of political leaders and so on. So you have a district superintendent, he's making progress and so on, and then he leaves his position. A new district superintendent comes in and he wants to have his own stamp. Or we have a state commissioner who's achieved incredible results in Tennessee. To think that's the highest in the history of NAEP improvement. And maybe if Kevin is not there in 2 years, maybe there's another initiative that is taken up. So we have to have staying power. It's no different with businessmen. I find that businessmen, they get excited about education. They're into the game for about 2 years and they find out how tough it is and they move on to the next thing. So, you know, it's a matter of carrying things out.
Speaking of the next thing, we've been talking mostly about K-12 education, but there's a lot of research that many of the gaps that we're talking about between upper income and kids from upper income and lower income family, or between white and minority kids, kids of color, are apparent by the age of 4. And in many ways don't really change that much through the educational system for many kids. Just kind of, they're there and they stay. They don't get a lot better or worse. So how important in the overall scheme of things, and you heard an impassioned plea at lunch, basically saying we are never going to close the achievement gaps unless we provide some kind of universal preschool. Is that right, Bruce?
I think that universal preschool is essential. I think that we can't stop there. We have to start as early as we possibly can, and education has to last a lifetime. But there's no question that that way too many kids are starting out way behind by the time school starts. And I think to your earlier question, look, if we have to recognize that education is we have to make education our best ticket out of poverty, not our biggest excuse for why we can't do anything about it.
Preschool, universal preschool. We have seen just extraordinary tension over the Affordable Care Act and expanding Medicaid in many, many Republican-leaning states saying no. If Congress did approve a universal preschool program along the lines of what was done on the children's health in the 90s, or some of the efforts on charter schools trying to promote this in states, do you think Republican states would feel comfortable accepting the money from Washington, or would many of them feel that was politically untenable?
You know, what I think is really important, whether it's this discussion of universal preschool or any policy that we believe in, extended school day, you have to do it right. It's not a matter of just doing it. You have to do it right. You have to do it well. So there were states, I'm going to pick on a red state, Oklahoma, that has been doing universal preschool for a long time, and their student performance on the 4th grade NAEP stinks. So universal preschool in and of itself is not the solution. And then there were states that have made tremendous gains in reading that didn't have universal preschool. What you need to have is a universal preschool program that is actually based on outcomes. Is it feeding into a system that is ready to accept and make sure the gains that the kids get in pre-K don't decline? Is it choice-based? Because if you set up a monopolistic universal preschool system, you may not have the outcomes that you want. Do you have a system that's based on early literacy? It's not just childcare, but we actually want kids to know a certain number of letters of the alphabet by the time they leave. Do we have accountability on the providers? So I don't think the question is, should we have it? It's, should we have a program that is done well and that feeds into a system that also builds on that, and that the kids don't regress as soon as they've come out of the pre-K program.
And as part of that, should we let states kind of one by one decide whether we're going to do this, or should we give them a nudge by creating a federal pot of money to encourage them to go ahead?
So I'm an advocate of states' rights and states' issues on this because I think states can come up with more creative solutions. So if the federal government wants to provide incentive money for it, they also need to allow states to have flexibility to actually implement a pre-K program the way they want to. That means having flexibility on Head Start and other programs that are already federally funded. You know, states that want to take the funding and put together a customized, choice-based, early literacy-based program that would be measured based on outcomes, I think, if that was the option that was available, states can and should take the feds up on that option.
Yeah. Kevin, so actually what we've been discussing in the last few minutes is in a fantasy alternative world
Yes.
where Congress was able to reach agreement
Right.
on anything relating
Right.
to education, much less agreement with the president and signing it. And while it was an enjoyable visit to that alternative world, the one that we live in is one in which they are just absolutely stalemated. There's almost no discussion, I think, even anymore of reauthorizing No Child Left Behind. So at this point, what is the role of Washington? Is Congress now relevant in your thinking about how you're going to proceed in education reform?
Not really. I don't spend any time thinking about Congress and what they may or may not do. I think, we work through the U.S. Department of Education on things like our waiver from No Child Left Behind and the terms around that waiver, and that's where there is, continued federal authority, and we do think about that, worry about that, have conversations about that. But broadly speaking, it's a state game. And we at the state level are trying to decide how do we set our vision for what we want to accomplish, and what are the key priorities, and how do we build the will to go do those things. And I think an astonishing amount of time has been squandered over the last 7 years getting together in small groups discussing what Washington may or may not do on education. And if everybody in education could get back all the time that they spent in meetings talking about the next iteration of No Child Left Behind and plow that into something useful, we'd all be a lot better off.
Yeah.
So Russell, let me ask you. Obviously, Congress and the administration are stalemated. Congress is stalemated within itself, but the administration has tried a number of means to create kind of a new role for the federal government in catalyzing reform through Race for the Top, through the waiver process. Do you think the Obama administration and maybe the other alums all the alums can weigh in? Have they found a viable way to try to catalyze reform from the federal level in the absence of congressional action, or could this be have a lot greater impact if there was in fact new legislation?
No doubt. I mean, new legislation that united a country around what it will take to transform schools will help us all. That said, I've witnessed firsthand, we all have the kind of catalytic change that this administration has been able to ensure by preconditioning funds, by creating competitions that make people want to do things that they had been utterly recalcitrant to do, whether that was lifting charter caps, as we saw from Race to the Top, or ensuring good data and data systems that could talk to one another, teacher identifiers and student identifiers, to really be able to understand growth in a classroom. Those were things that states like California refused to do for years, and changed those laws in an effort to compete for funds that only 12 states ended up getting any real part of in the first round of Race to the Top. That change was remarkable, and I think we have to give it to this administration for using the tools, finding the tools that the previous administration used to. I mean, look, No Child Left Behind is not a federal mandate, right? It does not prescribe how to teach young people. It says that if you want these Title I dollars, these are some things you need to do, one of which is assessing all kids and measuring progress. So I am biased, I will be, right? But I think given the restrictions and limitations with what's happening in Washington today, we've seen greater change spurred at the state and local levels through federal assistance and intervention than we've seen before.
All right, let's bring in the audience for a few questions, then I'm going to come back for a lightning round of quick answers on a couple things with our panelists. So I don't know if there's a microphone. There is a microphone. If anybody's got a question, there's 2 microphones. Do we have any questions from our group? I think we have one over there in the back. Yes, right there. Just identify yourself real quick.
Oh, hi. Thanks. I lived in Japan for a while.
Can you just identify yourself real quick?
Oh, my name's Brooke Allen. I lived in Japan for a while, and I met a Japanese World War II veteran who I asked him, how did you achieve this amazing change from a militaristic country based on sort of feudal warlords to modern Japan? And he said, remember, there's two things. There's nothing you can do right now, and there's nothing you can't do if you raise your children to be unlike you. Now, I want to know, we haven't really talked about the parents in this, because I think I have this feeling that we have a generation of people, even among us affluent whites, who we need our children to be not like us. We need them to be somebody different than we are, because the problems that we have are a product of us. People tell me all their problems about the younger generations. Right. I say, so you're saying they're a product of bad parenting. Right. Your children are a product of bad. So where do the parents play into this?
Parents, Kevin, how do you work with parents?
So one of the things that I think we're challenged with at the state level is figuring out how you get good parent communication. We just don't have good mechanisms either to us or from us to parents, and I think it's a huge challenge. And it is a key. If we're actually going to transform education, reaching parents is really critically important. And I actually think, we try to reach a broad public audience, but we don't have good mechanisms for reaching parents, and I think that's a huge problem in the discussion.
Yeah, as part of the reforms in Florida, how did you kind of how did the schools interact with parents differently?
Well, I don't know that we succeeded completely in communicating with parents, but I do think part of the answer is empowering them. The more that you empower a parent to be engaged in his or her child's education, and that means, to me, making decisions over really basic things like who's my child's teacher, what school does my child go to, and it's something that I think we need to head to in the future, is having a customized education. I have 2 children. I have a son who's almost 6 and a daughter who's 3.5, and they're like night and day. And I know that what works with one is not going to work with the other. And so what do I want for my son in the future? I want what is going to best fit his educational needs and his educational style. And that may mean a traditional public school. It may mean starting off the morning and taking an online course at home with mom and going to a traditional public school for a couple of periods, taking an online course from the fantastic teacher in New York State, doing dual credit in the afternoon, doing some work study programs. I think we need to re-envision what education is and make sure that it is customized to the child, and that means empowering the parents with more decision-making authority, empowering parents with more options, and when you do that, parents will be more engaged, and that's what we need them to be.
Let's get one more question in, and then I will try to give you a final question thought for out the door.
Hi, my name is Ted Fenton, and my oldest is 5 and entering kindergarten next year, so I can't tell you how near and dear this conversation is to my heart. My question is, I've read a lot of different things about how much money is spent on our children, and so my question is, number one, is there enough money in the system, and is it just a question of how efficiently we're spending it, or 2, do we as a society need to prioritize the amount of money that's flowing to our children?
Good question. Lowell, you want to start off? What do you think?
I happen to believe that there's enough money in the system if the money was spent properly, but that's not to say that more money spent properly is not going to yield additionally beneficial results. I will say, I just want to comment on one quick thing here about the federal government. I do think that the federal government, both with the Bush administration and the Obama administration, we talk about how people can't really, we've lost civility and things of that nature. But the fact of the matter is that many of these competitive programs were started in the Bush administration and were continued in the Obama administration and have stimulated a lot of innovation and creativity. And the whole issue of an initiative like TAP was born in part and supported in part by these kinds of funds. But as Kevin said, at the end of the day, education is really the business of the states. And the federal government can provide various kinds of incentives through funding and so on, but in reality, it's really a state and local responsibility.
Dollars?
More would be helpful, no doubt, right? Our schools are required to do more today than they've ever had to do before, but we have to spend it more wisely and more efficiently. Federal government historically is between 8 cents to 10 cents on the dollar, right? This is about civic will in a state, in priorities in a state, and ensuring that the rhetoric of most of our state politicians matches our resource allocation.
Kevin?
We spend more than any industrialized nation in the world on education on a per pupil basis, and the vast majority of that money goes into salaries and benefits. And the vast majority of the money that goes into salaries and benefits pays people strictly on the basis of how long they have been in the system. So that a 20-year veteran, low-performing physical education teacher earns significantly more than an incredible, innovative fifth-year chemistry teacher. And that's a system that makes absolutely no sense, and that's where most of our money is.
Bruce, do you want to weigh in? With the Broad Foundation, you work with big urban districts that often have big budgets, but big challenges. Is it not enough resources or not enough efficiency in the way the resources are spent?
Money's not the core of the problem. Money helps if it's spent well. I think that it can make reforms easier, and that the changes that we're going to have to go through in the coming years are going to require us to all work harder. And so it's going to cost more. You can't go to universal pre-K without more money. You can't have a much more effective teacher preparation system or teacher performance system without some more. But there's, as Ruslan said, much inefficiency in the system.
Let me ask a final question, and we can call up slide 2, please, for this last point. I just want to ask you whether we are talking about adding $1 or reallocating $1. If you had $1 to spend to close those very stubborn gaps that we're still looking at 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, where would you put that dollar? Where do you think you can make, what is your biggest point of leverage? Where do you think you can make the biggest bang for the buck in closing the attainment gaps that we're still dealing with? And maybe just everybody just give a final thought here. Kevin, maybe lead us off.
Teacher quality. I'd plow every dollar into paying our most effective teachers more money.
Add to that student supports. We have to catch students before they slip and provide them the interventions they'll need to get back on track with great teaching.
Teacher effectiveness. We have to do exactly what Kevin just said, and we also have to create those kind of roles and responsibilities so that teachers can move up a continuum and the best teachers can share their practices.
Teacher quality, teacher effectiveness, absolutely. I'm going to have to give you 2 more though.
Yeah.
Early literacy. If we don't make sure our children are reading effectively before they leave 3rd grade and they move into 4th grade, game over. If they're not reading, they can't succeed in the future. And then I do think technology has to play into this equation. We haven't talked about technology and customization, but how has technology impacted every single aspect of our lives? But yet when we enter most classrooms, technology is the computer in the corner that kids can earn 5 minutes, to play on if they really behaved well. We have to change how technology is integrated into our classrooms, but that's going to take some investment to actually integrate it into our classrooms.
Bruce?
Teacher prep, charter quality, and personalized learning technology in the classroom.
Wow. This has been a great tour of the horizon. We got one more comment? Yeah. Hold on. Wait for the microphone.
If you want to empower parents, if you want to empower teachers, if you want to empower principals, you have to break the back of the unions, don't you?
Well, there you go. Do you?
We certainly have to stop protecting failing schools at the expense of a parent's right to know what's happening in them. And we certainly have to challenge the leadership of unions that survey after survey tells us does not reflect teachers in the classroom and their belief system about what it will take to help kids.
Is reform incompatible with unions?
No, but I think that anyone who stands in the way of changing a broken status quo is incompatible with reform.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Unions have a role to play, but right now we have a system that on the political side too often makes its decisions based on what the union thinks is right rather than what is right for our children.
All right. With that, I think we're done. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.